Hey everyone, so I want to start with a bit of a disclaimer. The Vaporfire rig that I'm working with right now is still, I hope, a work in progress. I still have ideas for how I want to improve it in the future, and indeed I'm actually hoping to get a lot of ideas from you guys if you make your own, and hopefully leave some comments on things that you may have done differently that worked better, or other ideas for how I can improve my own rig. Hope to definitely work those in, and in the future update this video with anything I've found. So basically, the first thing you'll find in the description is the current version I'm going to be talking about in this video of the Vaporfire. I'm starting, the original version is version 2.0, and so if you guys tune in again later, you can basically skip to this point in the video or check the first line in the description to check if I'm still on version 2.0 or if I've updated the video. So it's worth checking in every now and again, even if you built your own rig, just to see if there are any improvements I've worked in or any new ideas for the Vaporfire. With that said, let's get started. So the other day I saw this video about this thing called Vaporfire, and it pretty much blew my mind away. Now, I live in a small studio apartment in upstate New York, and it's always been a dream of mine to have a fireplace because it gets cold here in the winter and we don't get much sunlight, and I love staring at a fireplace. I think it's a very healthy alternative to looking at screens or TV, is just staring into a fireplace for hours. Especially I listen to a lot of audiobooks, so that's a great way to occupy my visual senses while I'm listening to the audiobook instead of what I usually tend to do, which might be playing video games on my phone maybe, or maybe something on my computer. So this was a great way for me to get away from screens and to finally have a kind of fireplace in my space. So I immediately started looking into what were the options to get one of these Vaporfire things. I needed one pretty much, and I wanted something standalone because of the size of my apartment, and obviously I don't think I could ever get permission to install everything, but I found that all the options are pretty much installation only. There were no standalone Vaporfire options that I could find, and certainly none that were under the $1,000 price range, which is way beyond what I can afford. So I looked at some videos online of different components that I could use, and I came to the very quick conclusion that this is doable. As a DIY project, this should be very doable. So I invited over one of my friends who's an engineer. I talked her through what my plans were, and she approved the design. So then I went ahead and got all the different materials and started out. So below you'll see a list of all the materials that I used to build this. In total I spent probably now around $150 to $200, but that's just because this was the prototype. I can steer you guys away from some of the pitfalls that I ran into that should hopefully save you some money and time. I knew that I wanted mine to be in a black box, and I had already ordered a lot of the parts because I had just assumed that I could find a black box fairly easily. Either a used one I was hoping was optimal, I could find one something used, or else I was thinking at worst I could go somewhere like TJ Maxx or Home Goods and maybe find something there. I ended up finding nothing used or at Home Goods or at TJ Maxx, so I ended up going to Walmart, and Walmart only had one option for a black tote box. So I ended up going with the only size that they had there because I knew that I wanted it to be black. However, if you guys look on Amazon or you have some other source for these, and honestly, it doesn't have to be black. I want mine to be black. Yours can be whatever color you want. If you just have a tote lying around, whatever color it is, you can use it and turn it into one of these Vaporfires. So use whatever tote you want. That you can definitely save some money on the tote if you'd like. Links below basically to a similar tote to what I got. Even though I got mine at Walmart, there were obviously similar things on Amazon too, so you can find links to the exact one that I used below. So yeah, once I got the box, I basically started cutting the holes in it that I needed. The first one was the vent fan on the top, which is where the mist was meant to come out of, which is what I sort of envisioned. And so I cut the hole in the top, and basically what I did to do that, initially I tried with a drill bit to cut the whole thing. I didn't know how I thought that would work, really, honestly. But what I ended up finding works actually pretty well is to cut the initial hole with a drill bit and then just go at it with some scissors. Scissors proved to be actually quite efficient at cutting this type of material. So you can definitely go out with scissors. You don't really have to worry about being too precise or clean with your cuts because eventually all of the vents are going to be covered by duct tape at some point, so you don't really have to worry too much about making perfect cuts or making it look too pretty. So I started with just cutting the vent on the top because initially I thought basically I could get these mist makers off of Amazon. They're only 12 bucks. I could stick a few of them in the box, and maybe even just as a basic concept, I could just put those in there and the mist would come out the top. But I was very skeptical of that because I knew that mist doesn't tend to move on its own in a box. It would probably just sit in the box and not go anywhere. So I knew I was probably going to have to add ventilation. And in fact, I did try it out that way, and as I theorized, it did exactly as I said, and it just sort of pooled in the box and it didn't go anywhere. So I basically had to also cut a hole in the side of the box where I was going to install a fan that I had ordered. I had ordered very specifically a waterproof fan. And I put a link to that below. I think it was like $30 or something like that, but worth it because I just, you know, for safety in mind, it's waterproof, so I don't have to worry about anything. Besides that, to be extra safe, I actually bought also this hydrophobic material that's also used to cover like speakers, and basically the idea is that the water just kind of slides off of the material. And I put that around the fan as an extra precaution, but what I found when I did that is that it blocked too much of the fan's airflow. So what I ended up doing is cutting some holes in it, and I'm happy I did keep some of it on still, because it helps block the light coming out of the box, so that all the light's coming out of the top instead of out of the back. So it does still serve a sort of purpose, but not the purpose that I initially planned on. And so if you'd like, you could actually skip this step entirely and skip on the material that I listed below, because it doesn't work on the fan as I had intended. The fan alone should be enough. I mean, it's waterproof. The material was just overkill in my opinion to make this extra safe, but so you can skip out on the material if you'd like. Then I basically taped the fan in the back. Then inside the box, what I did is I put basically just a couple of old takeout containers that I drilled holes into the bottom of to let pressure flow in and out of, put them upside down inside the box, and then on top of them I put another smaller Tupperware container. Now the reason I did it like that is first off because I was worried that if the mist was being made on the very bottom of my tote, that it wouldn't be high up enough to get pushed out of the vent, so I wanted to elevate it from the bottom a little bit. Besides that, I also wanted to make a container that I could easily take out and clean when stuff started building up in it. So it had a couple sort of double fold purpose, but if you're doing it in a smaller container than I did and you don't mind having to reach in there to clean out, then it's not a terrible idea to just get rid of this step altogether and just let the water pool in the bottom of the tote. So yeah, I put this interior container inside, and then I filled that with water, and I put the mist makers inside of that to make the mist, so that now the mist was being made right in front of the fan was blowing the mist, and then when I put the lid on, it worked exactly as I had hoped. The mist was coming out of the vent, but it wasn't coming out uniform. The problem was that the mist was coming out and it was kind of falling off the edge of the tote a bit more than I wanted, instead of going straight up like a fireplace would. So what I ended up doing was sort of jerry-rigging a vent, a sort of air vent. I took a glass bottle that I had that was recyclable, and I filled it halfway up with water, closed it, and then I taped the lid from one of those takeaway containers to the bottle so that it would just sort of sit there and push the air more upwards. And it ended up working so well that I never actually replaced it with something more permanent. It's still in there right now, acting as an air vent, just kind of forcing the air upwards in a more uniform direction, creating more of like an upwards fire feel to the whole rig. So I was happy with how that worked out. If you have a smaller, shorter rig, you might not be able to work it out like I did. You might have to figure out something else, but it's fairly easy to just figure out some kind of air vent that's going to force the air upwards. Or you might not need it if it's a smaller container too. The pressure will be higher, so it might come out more uniform anyway. You'll just have to experiment a little bit with that. Once the air vent was in and the mist makers were in, the mist was coming out of the top in a fairly uniform manner, it was time to install the lights. I went through a few different iterations of how to install the lights, and so I'm going to spare you guys the trouble of trying some of the stuff I did. First thing I wanted was some kind of wire frame that I could take out, but the wire is just never going to be strong enough to hold up the weight of the lights, so scrap that idea. I should have sort of known from the beginning. My engineer friend told me, but I didn't want to believe her, and yeah, woe begoes me for not listening. So scrap that immediately. What I then found was a friend who had some arrows he was throwing out, so I actually asked him if I could keep those arrows, and I shortened them just to the length of the box so that I could just basically slide them in there, wrap the lights around it, and they would be right underneath the vent. The trouble that I ran into was that the lip didn't provide enough of a clearance from where the vent was, and basically the lights were blocking the vent, and not enough air was getting over the lights for the mist to come out. So basically it was just throwing the whole thing out of whack, and so I had to scrap that idea. Basically the problem was that the lights had to be a bit further down from the vent than doing some kind of installed thing would do. I was out of ideas at this point, so I basically settled for just duct taping it in. Now, this is not ideal for a couple reasons. One is that if you ever have to replace the lights, it's a huge hassle. You have to rip out all the duct tape and then replace it, which is a fairly arduous process. And besides that, when I need to take the container out to clean it, or when I need to clean the container in general, these lights just can't be removed. They're just there permanently, kind of in the way, but I've just ended up working around them. It's not ideal, but hey, the box looks freaking fantastic, so I'm not going to complain. But you guys are definitely open to try and figure out some better solutions for holding the lights up if you can, and let me know what they are. I'd be glad to hear about that. I went through a few different iterations of how to string up the lights, but what I'm showing you guys is basically the final version that's been working best and what you guys saw in the introduction video, and it really gave a great effect. So basically now I had the finished box. I have some early versions here of 1.0 and 1.1 where basically it was the very rudimentary version of just a box that was blowing out mist with lights underneath that made it look incredibly like fire. To the degree that at night, I live on a ground floor apartment. I was a little bit worried about leaving my curtains open in case anybody saw this through the window and thought I had it looked like I had a molting fire sitting inside of this box, and the fire was just pouring out of the top of the vent. So I was worried that people might think that I had a fire going in here, so I actually kept the light intentionally on different colors than red, because it's fairly obvious when it's not on red that it's not actually a fire. But if I left it on red or orange, someone definitely walking by definitely could have been, did a double take. So I can't actually fully recommend the exact LED lights that I used, unfortunately. I did list them below just for reference, and you can see some of the similar items. What you want to be looking for is waterproof LED light strips. The reason I can't recommend the ones I used is because the first one that I installed started flickering out and having issues. And so I did actually replace it with the second pair it came with. Both are 5-meter long strips. So I did replace it with the second one came with, and that one too now recently has started to have some issues. It specifically is having an issue where when I try to just have red light on, it leaves a little bit of the blue light on as well, which gives it a kind of pinkish look, which is very particularly annoying because red is one of the colors I use the most. These lights are advertised as waterproofs, and I read the reviews. They look fairly good. But I just can't recommend them, so you're gonna have to find some other company, and hopefully they have a more reliable product. They aren't even submerged in any area. They're just in a high humidity situation, and I'll talk about lighting in a minute. But what I'd like to eventually get for this, and when I have enough money, is a Philips Hue system. Now those are more expensive, and it's going to be a bigger investment if you guys want to take that route. But the reason I'd like to eventually get a Philips Hue system is because first off, their outdoor light strips seem very durable. They have a full thick plastic outer coating, which also helps to deliver a more uniform color light, which is another thing that I like about them. Besides all of that, the functionalities that are available through the Philips Hue apps are just way more advanced than what you'll get from one of these systems. These still have a connection to an app where you have some functionality, which can be cool, and some of them are useful, but don't rely on any of the music functions to actually give you any good results or anything like that. It's just more the basic stuff. Which can be fun, but the Hue system does actually, very specifically what I mentioned is it even has like a fireplace / candle lighting setting, which I would be very curious to see how that works out with the Aquafire. The trouble is that, yeah, it's $90 for the base set of that, and that's for just 2 meters of light strip. I used 5 meters, as I said, and it's best you really want to cram in as much light as you can underneath the vent, because that's going to increase the realism of the fire effect. So, 2 meters, I'm curious to see if it would work with 2 meters, but I'm thinking that 5 meters is really pretty much the minimum to get that intense fire look that you need. But otherwise, in the meanwhile, if this does start to bug out even more than it has been, I might look at some of the similar end options as this one, but something from a company that might be more reliable or have a more durable feel to it. So yeah, I can't recommend exactly the ones that I used below. So next up is the wiring. So to wire it all, basically, I have the fan already installed at the back, and basically in the corner of that I drilled another hole, a bigger hole, basically to put all the wires through. And what I did is I basically taped it thoroughly through with duct tape on the inside first, made it as flush as I could, and then I did the same on the outside again with duct tape. And I gave quite a bit of lead for the light, so that the light is actually sticking out quite a bit. So I actually have light on the outside of the box that I covered up with duct tape, so that it gave just basically leeway so that the humidity wouldn't get in the area where it turns from strip light into wiring. And even though I took all of those steps and all the wiring is on the outside of the box, and none of the other items that are inside there that are wired to the outside have been showing issues, the lights have been running into issues. So that's basically where I'm at with that. But the wiring, as you can see here, is basically all taped up on the inside and then taped up on the outside as well. And at the back, basically, it's all connected through to a single power supply, basically, that I can turn on and off. That'll turn the whole device on. Eventually, what I want to get to do to replace this is get a timer, outlet, so that I can set it on a timer when I'm in my bed too, so I can leave it on a bit at night and go to bed without worrying that it's going to be on all night. So that's the next step, and I recommend doing that from the beginning if you want. Is starting with one of those timer outlets. But otherwise, yeah, you just basically wire everything up to a single outlet, and you can turn off and on that outlet. The wiring's made a lot easier by the fact that the mist makers actually have a connector in the middle, which you can connect and disconnect, which means you don't have to put the whole fat outlet bit through the hole of the wiring. And same with the lights, which have sort of a smaller connector that you need to lead outside that connects to a sort of central unit which controls the light. And so you put all that on the outside of the box, where it won't be affected by any of the mist or the water. And yeah, indeed, I haven't had any issues with leakage. There's been no water buildups outside of the box. There's no water coming in the area where the wiring is coming out. So yeah, I'm really not sure why these lights have been giving me grief. When you cut a slit in the top of the box, it actually eliminates a lot of the structural integrity, so the box top will start to lag a little bit, kind of fall inwards. And I was worried that if I start putting stuff on top, it would basically all just start to slowly slide into the box, which is a very bad thing. So we want to limit as many outside materials going into the box as possible, keep that environment as sterile as possible to prevent bacteria from building up. I'll talk about maintenance later in the process. It is something you're going to have to consider if you want to build one of these, so just stick in if you want to hear about maintenance, or skip to later on in the video to hear more about the maintenance if you don't want to hear about the garden. So yeah, basically what I had to do to reinforce the top of it is I took those arrows from earlier that I hadn't ended up using, and I stuck them on top of the lid. I ended up using the black duct tape to sort of tape over the arrow to hold the lid up, and I have videos of how I did that. You can see here. It ended up looking pretty good, even with all the tape on it and everything. It looked all right, but you can see the end results basically, and it was just the arrows taped up, and it was holding the lid up, and it did two things. First off, it held the lid up, it provided that structural integrity, but it also provided a little bit of a lip, so that anything that I put on top of it would not just slide right into the there was actually a little bit of a barrier there to stop anything from sliding into the slit that I had made. So this ended up working out pretty well with the arrows on there. It looked good. Even if you aren't going to put a garden in, I might recommend this stuff because it really helps to hold the lid up and makes it look a bit more slick. Now, the long-term vision I had for this, you guys can stop there if that's all you want. Great, you've done a great job. If you want to take it one step further, like I did, I wanted to build a little garden on top of it, because the air, when you can't open the windows here in the winter time because it's cold, the air can get fairly stale inside. So I wanted some greenery to help clean out the air, refresh the air a little bit. So what I ended up doing is I ended up grabbing some moss from our local forest. Here's some footage of the forest and where I found the moss. Unfortunately, my old 60D camera ended up starting to break down that day, so I didn't end up getting to managing to take so much footage of collecting the moss. I did take some on my phone. I might show that if it ended up coming out all right. But it wasn't hard to do, basically just harvesting moss wherever you find it in a forest or in an open space. And then basically I just sat there for a bit picking out bugs. There weren't very many in them. Picking out some bugs. I collected a little bit of dirt where I collected the moss and basically brought that all home. So then after I'd installed the arrows to hold the lid up, was time to basically, I took the material that I was using as a cover for the vent, and I just put it along the top, kind of made like a little bit of a rail around the side. It actually looks really nice also just besides, it drapes over the side, it gives a nice effect. And then what it means is that if I ever want to remove the garden, remove the moss, I can just pick up that material and toss it out. I don't have to deal with like that much cleaning or anything. So it provides an aesthetic effect, and also a practical purpose, so I'd recommend taking that step if you're going to put a garden on top of it. Then I basically dispersed some of the dirt that I collected with the moss underneath. I laid the moss out on top. I got a few different kinds of moss, and I sort of just laid them out in different ways on the top of it. And then I'd also collected some rocks from the river while I was down there, and I sort of laid those out around the exit of the vent to give it this really cool effect where it's kind of like a chasm in the ground with mist pouring out of it, which looks very cool, exactly what I wanted it to look like. I was left with one tiny small problem, which was that when I put my bonsai plant in there, which is where I wanted it to go, the light reflecting off the bonsai pot was just so intense that it kind of threw off the whole effect, and I just wasn't happy with how it was looking, but I did want the bonsai to be there. So what I ended up finding as a solution that ended up working so beautifully, and I recommend it immensely, was finding this translucent rock that I had basically picked up on a hike in Greece in Eos back when I was in high school. And I picked it up on that hike, and just because it looked really cool, and when I tried it out on top of the vent to help block the light from reflecting onto the bonsai tree, I discovered something really cool, which is that it looks like a dragon egg when it's lit up from underneath, and it's got that really cool glowing effect. It's mesmerizing to look at, as mesmerizing as the fire itself. So I was really happy with how that ended up looking, and I ended up going around my house to scavenge any other translucent rocks I had lying around and just sort of laid them out around it because I just really liked how that looked. So definitely, if you have any translucent rocks sitting around, play with how they look around the vent. It's a very cool effect. I can't recommend enough. It makes it look like it's glowing with heat almost. Definitely adding to the fire effect and also helping to soften the light a little bit onto the bonsai tree. So that was basically it. I had the garden installed. I put my bonsai in there. The rocks around the edge. It looked great, and that's everything that I'd ever wanted it to be. Couldn't be happier. So, but then it comes on to maintenance, because that is a component. The more I built up the garden on the top, the harder it became to remove the top, but that's just something I'm gonna have to suffer with because I wanted the garden there. For me, the steps I have to do is basically take my bonsai tree off. I have to remove basically some of the bigger rocks around the vent, mainly the translucent rock that's next to the vent, and then I can take the whole lid off. Once I'm inside, basically what happens is that as the mist builds up in there, it builds up along the sides, it runs down to the bottom, so water collects underneath where my interior container is, so I have to empty that out periodically. Then besides that, basically I have to eventually, every now and then, I do it about every 2 weeks to stop anything from building up in there. Also because the little mist makers from Amazon are very cheap quality, and they seem to get they rust very quickly and very easily. I'm in fact not sure how long they're gonna last, but besides that, so I have to clean them, and then I take out all the water, I dump it out, I clean the interior container, I clean the entire inside of the container using a sort of Clorox type product, and just thoroughly clean the inside to really stop any bacteria from building up. So I do that every 2 weeks, and that's really what you have to do to stop this from becoming a safety hazard. So there is maintenance involved, but it's the same as you would get on a mist maker or on a humidifier, which you do have to clean out periodically, or else the exact same thing will happen where you get gunk building up. And since I was using a humidifier anyway, I mean, this is more maintenance than a humidifier, but it's also my fireplace, and a fireplace is also maintenance where you have to clean out the ash periodically and all that other stuff. So you're always going to run into issues no matter what you want with a fireplace and humidifier in the winter. So it's just a matter of picking your battles, and I absolutely love this solution for fireplace and humidifier. So can't recommend it enough. Definitely try building your own at home. Let me know how that goes for you. Let me know how much you end up spending on the process if you end up building a smaller one. I knew I wanted mine to be this big because I wanted to be able to see it from my bed easily and watch it as I was reading my audiobooks, but you could definitely try and build a smaller one for a little bit less than I ended up spending on the whole project. You could probably get it down to even like $80 possibly. So let me know how you guys end up pulling that together. Definitely curious to hear in the comments how you do with it. Also, if you have any questions, if I find that any questions are popping up repeatedly in the comments, I may also modify the video to update you guys and answer those and do like an FAQ at the end. But otherwise, yeah, like the video, put some comments below, subscribe. This is actually not the kind of video I normally do. Normally I'm into video time-lapse videography, so you can check out some of my other videos. They're mostly time lapses. Like them if you do. If I get a bit of traction on YouTube, maybe I'll start putting some more videos on YouTube of my time-lapse stuff as well. But definitely want to hear how you guys fare on this DIY project. Excellent. Well, thanks for tuning in, and have a good day.